So I just want to thank the attendees that are here, the sponsors, the exhibitors. I want to thank the IRFA board members for giving me an opportunity to do this and for their support. And I also want to take a moment to thank Lucy Norton. I don't know, Lucy's probably out fixing some last minute thing that's going on, but Lucy Norton has headed up 9 of these things. So whether she can hear us or not, let's clap really loud for Lucy. She does a great job. We've had, over 600 people from 25 countries register. These things are, I think this is a great speaker lineup, maybe with the exception of the person you're about to hear from. And they always are very professional, except for when I mess something up. I also want to recognize the work of TJ Page, who you might see running around here, who does our communications and some other things for us. TJ's back there. Oh, Lucy is there. Okay. And TJ helps out a great deal. And then also Grant Menke, he's a little mad at me because I got him out staffing the booth. But the booth's the most important thing here. If any of you leave this summit without signing up for our, if you're Iowans especially, I guess if you're not Iowans, you'd have to move here to participate in the caucuses. But for the Iowans, if you leave here without signing up at the IRFA booth right outside the trade show to take the RFS pledge for the Iowa caucuses, we know who registered, we'll know who takes the pledge, and therefore we'll know who didn't. And we'll track you down. So with that, let's get started here. As I look back at 2014, I think a lot about rain. And I thought during 2012, I kind of promised myself, I'm never going to complain about when it rains too much again. And 2013, there for a minute, but we got through it. But 14 really tested that resolve to never complain about rain. In fact, at one time, this is a true story, we were talking about the weather and what was coming up, and I heard a farmer in August say, I really hope this next rain that's coming in, this next front that's coming through misses my farm. In August, he wanted the rain to miss his farm. I've never heard that before. I may never hear it again. But the results of all that rain were actually pretty good, especially compared to 2012 and 2013. 14.2 billion bushel corn crop, 171 bushel an acre, 4 billion bushel almost soybean crop, 48 bushels an acre, were just amazing. And so what happened? We had these bumper crops come in, we saw commodity prices go down, and for the renewable fuels producers, that was not a bad thing. We had a pretty darn good first 6 months of 2014. And I'm not embarrassed to say that, because quite frankly, we've come through some tough years, and it's about time we made a little bit of money. Then what happened? Well, we had crude oil prices at $100 in July. And 6 months later, they were at $50, actually a little bit below $50. So by the end of the year, into 2014, it was a little bit different, a little more competitive. We don't complain about we don't complain about low oil prices or low gas prices. We're consumers too. Our job is to fit our products into the marketplace. And if we can have cheaper fuel for Americans, that's great. We can be a part of that. So essentially, what we see happen toward the end of the year? I read the headlines, I listened to General Clark earlier today, but here's my take on it. Essentially, you had a free market system start producing more oil and dumping it into the world market that's controlled by people who aren't used to operating in the free market, and they didn't like it very much. So I think you essentially had the Saudis saying, frack you to North Dakota. And we were pretty much caught in the crossfire with those lower oil prices. So I think that's kind of what happened. So let's get started and talk a little bit about the state of the industry. Let's see, did I do this right? All right. So where are we at in Iowa? We've got 43 ethanol plants. We produced a record 3.9 billion gallons. For the first time, we produced cellulosic ethanol last year with 2 different plants, Quad County Corn Processors and the Poet DSM plant. We use about 1.4 billion bushels of corn. That's about 58% of Iowa's corn. And we convert that into ethanol. And yes, folks, we always have to remind people, ethanol and high-protein distillers' grains. We not only produce fuel, we produce feed. So Iowa represented about 27% of the production in the country last year for ethanol. On biodiesel, we have 12 biodiesel plants. We've had 10 that have operated over the last several years, and they produced about 227 million gallons. That was just slightly below the year before because of all the policy uncertainty out in D.C., and we represent about 16% of U.S. biodiesel production. And in Iowa, we still use probably compared to some states, a lot more soybean oil as feedstocks. We have some great crush facilities here, but we do use the animal fats. We're seeing growing use of industrial corn oil. Used cooking grease is up, as well as we do bring in a little bit of canola oil. So what's that mean for Iowa? We're releasing today our annual economic impact study for Iowa. Now you'll see some of these numbers are actually lower than in the past. And that's why it's so important that you go take that caucus pledge, because we're already starting to see the trickle-down effects of the lower commodity prices and the pullback in the ag sector. When you're buying $3.50 corn, you spend less money than when you're buying $7 corn, and then those trickle-down effects are reduced. So we have the purchases there, but we're still sizable. We're still about 3% of Iowa's employment is directly tied, and both directly and indirectly, but tied to the renewable fuels industry, about 47,000 jobs. And so as I think through this, and I think through the year we've come on, I think I can stand before you today and confidently say that there's really been no time in the last decade where this industry has been better poised for rapid growth. I think that we are at a crossroads where we are basically ready to roll, and that made me think of something. So I thought maybe I'd illustrate that with a little video clip if someone's smarter than me. 106 miles to we might even play it again with sound. I don't know. Sometimes that helps. I could do the sound. All right, here we go. Oh, that's me. That's not good. There we go.
It's 106 miles to Chicago. We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes. It's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
So we're ready to roll. For those of you who don't know, that was the Blues Brothers from about 1980. As I told some of the young people I was trying to explain the Blues Brothers to, that I never heard of it. I said, well, look it up on the Google, and you can figure it out. So let's see. Can we get the PowerPoint back up? So we're ready to roll. And you might say, well, Monte, you know, low oil prices, you know, what's going on here? Why do you say that? Well, I think we are ready to roll. And the only question is, we're at a crossroads. Are we going to hit it, like John Belushi said in that clip, or are we going to stay stuck in neutral? Why do I think we're ready to roll? Record feedstock production, record corn, huge carryovers, low prices, soybeans, increased amount of distillers corn oil on the market. Commodity prices are down, Indian stocks are up. Now, I'm a farm kid too, so that's not all good news for farmers, but for renewable fuels producers, we're ready to be the giant sponge that sucks that up and make more renewable fuels. The capacity, the potential is there. What else do we have? We had a profitable year. It was, you know, obviously got a little difficult as the oil prices dropped, but for the year, it was a great year. Most plants have been able to pay down a huge part of any long-term debt they had, if not all of it. We should have robust working capital. And quite frankly, we also had millions of dollars go back out to some of you in this room as dividends to roll throughout the economy. We had a great year. We enter into 2015 in one of the strongest financial positions we've ever had. We've got new markets out there. E10 is the base fuel, folks. We've got 97, 98% E10 use in this country. Exports were up, so that's good. We've got efforts like Prime to Pump that some of you are involved in to get more and more retailers to offer E15 and higher blends, put in blender pumps. And here in Iowa, we have state programs as well. So the market potential to move forward is absolutely there. And we also are going to benefit from new technologies. We've got commercial scale cellulosic ethanol now, 2 plants online. One more going to be done sometime in the first half of this next year, the DuPont facility. And we're even looking at a municipal solid waste facility over near Cedar Rapids, and we're hoping we can see that go forward. We have advanced biodiesel feedstock, advances on both the pretreatment side and now on a distillation side to make it so that our biodiesel can go places and integrate into the diesel pool better than ever before. We're continuing to see the seed companies come out with new traits, new varieties, both in terms of things that help us turn the seeds and the commodities into renewable fuels, but also that give us those yields that we've talked about even during tough times and tough weather patterns. So we're seeing those, and we're seeing higher value co-products. You know, it's not just ethanol and distillers grains now. It's ethanol, distillers grains, corn oil, you name it. So the same thing with biodiesel, new markets for glycerin and different things like that. So I see a lot of new technologies. But what are we going to do? Are we going to hit it, or are we going to stay stuck in neutral? Well, first of all, let's not kid ourselves. This is a challenge. A $100 market, barrel of oil market is easier than a $50 barrel market. But you know what? Ethanol is still the country's cheapest source of fuel octane. So I don't think we're going to see any pullback in the use of E10 in the country. So that's not going to be an excuse. Well, what about the blend wall, though? Okay, Monte, but you already said we're at 98% E10 use. How do we go forward? In Iowa, we made great strides in biodiesel use. Over half the biodiesel sold in Iowa over half the diesel sold in Iowa is a biodiesel blend, and on average, we average about 8% in those 50% of the gallons. That's not bad, but how do we go forward? How do we get through this blend wall? Well, one of the key things is we talked about on that last panel, so I'm not going to belabor it, is the renewable fuel standard. You know, we had a president who campaigned in 2008 not just as a supporter of the renewable fuel standard, but someone who wanted to double it from 30 billion gallons to 60 billion gallons if he was elected president. And he came back, you know, that was nice. We probably didn't think that would actually happen. But obviously he was a supporter. He came back in 2012 and asked for Iowans' votes again and said he supported the renewable fuel standard. And then not too long after that, really out of, I got to tell you, I was shocked. If you'd have had me list all the ways that we might get hurt with the renewable fuel standard, and you said the administration putting out a rule that cut our legs out from underneath us, I would have had that about 100 on my list, which is why I did more listening than talking on the last panel. I clearly don't know what's going on in D.C. But we've got to have the renewable fuel standard. So is the Obama administration going to put out some rules this year for 2014, 2015, which by the time they get a rule out and finalize is essentially over? So we've missed 2 years. We came right up to the blend wall. We were about to crack through with the help of the IRFA, which is what the law envisioned, and they hit neutral. They hit pause for all of 2014, and practically we can stand here today in January and essentially say all of 2015. By the time you put out a proposed rule, take the comments and finalize it, 15's over. So the real question is, are we going to get 2016 out this year, get it going, and get the IRFA back on track? Folks, we need you to keep the pressure on the White House. Keep writing letters. Keep talking to people. When administration officials come into Iowa, I don't care what topic they're here on. It might be internet access to rural areas, which is great, but tell them about the IRFA as well. And we're going to do that in D.C. The other thing that we talked about, so I won't on the panel, is the different ways that Congress may come after the IRFA and try to harm it. So we've got to fight that fight. It was pretty quiet in Congress in 2014 because everybody was waiting to see what the Obama administration would do with the IRFA rule. Well, I think it's game on back in D.C. and in Congress, so that's what we've got to keep an eye on. And then we talked about the tax credit policy, on again, off again, on again. The oil guys have had 120 years. You know, we've got to fight this fight. We've got to explain that these are young industries. You've got the oil guys, and don't be embarrassed. You've got oil guys like Harold Hamm. He was famous for writing $1 billion check to his ex-wife not too long ago. If you saw that on the news, kind of amazing. But anyway, he made a lot of money in fracking, and he testified before Congress. You know, it took us 20, 30 years to figure out fracking. And these tax policies, the ones that aren't subsidies, were critical to that because they tried and failed, tried and failed, tried and failed, tried and failed, and eventually they got it right. Well, if it's good enough for oil, isn't that good enough for biodiesel? Isn't that good enough for cellulosic ethanol? Thank you. You can clap. It's encouraged. Get the blood flowing here. Because there's these guys. Okay, 102 years, intangible drilling costs. Boy, they lost a lot of money on fracking wells at the end of last year, and they will this year. They used to say all these tax subsidies for the oil industry added up about $4 billion. I'll bet you got to add some zeros to that with $50 barrel crude oil. But, you know, heaven forbid we touch their stuff. So let's call them out. They're hypocrites on this policy. Let's call them out and let's get some fairness in tax policy. Then they also like to say, well, you have that mandate. That RFS is nothing more than a mandate. We should not be picking winners and losers. Well, did you know there's a federal petroleum mandate? Now, you won't ever look up and find the words federal petroleum mandate in the U.S. code, but you won't also find the words ethanol mandate in the U.S. code. So what is it? In 1977, we passed a Clean Air Act. And for the first time, the federal government took over control of fuel regulations. And they said, you're either going to put a fuel in your car that is approved by the federal government, or you're going to face a $25,000 a day fine if we find an unapproved fuel in your car. Now, how do you get around this? Go buy an FFV. Anyone drive an FFV, flexible fuel vehicle? I do. I fill it up with E85. I'm one of the 10% of the cars on the roads that is exempt from this because I have that flexible technology. But for the other 90% of the cars on the roads, if you put anything over E15 in that car or truck or van, you violated federal law and you can be fined $25,000 a day. Now, back when my old pickup was not an FFE and I would go by Quad County corn processors and I had a blender pump there and it had E30 in it, I don't really want to say on the record in case the EPA watches this on the webcast or something that I filled it up with E30, but I might have. But you know what? If I took personal responsibility to do that and said that's my choice, I'll take responsibility for what happens, I was still violating federal law. Folks, that's a mandate. I would swap our roughly 10% RFS mandate for their 85% mandate in a heartbeat if they want to, but they pretend theirs doesn't exist. So they build up the blend wall we talked about earlier with the branded contracts that don't even allow independent retailers to, if you want fuel, don't sell high ethanol blends. You want to sell E15 in the summer? Too bad. We're going to get together as oil companies and agree to not ship you the blend stock you need in the summer to blend E15. So we'll prevent you from blending it because we can get together. If they got in a smoke-filled room and said, hey, we're not going to allow them to sell E15 in the summer, that'd be collusion, right? But the pipeline companies can poll their members and come up with a consensus because it's a, you know, to be fair, it's a common carrier pipeline. You have to agree on what's allowed in and what's not. But that allows them to essentially collude legally. It's nice if you get away with it. And then we talked about the E15 vapor pressure specs. If we don't equalize these, we're going to have a huge problem selling E15 year-round in 2/3 of the country. So where these specs hurt us. And we talked about that on the panel. There's also a panel this afternoon where we'll be hearing from retailers, and they'll probably talk about some of those challenges. That's a huge thing. So look at this, folks. Let's look forward to the presidentials. Here's what big oil gets. Here's what we get. And we're the ones that are supposed to be ashamed that the federal government helps us. Really? And I'll tell you what, there's some people coming here to run for president that have bills to eliminate this little box right here, and they don't have a bill to do anything over there. Well, they're going to get told about that and reminded about that and asked about that, and they're going to be asked to explain their hypocrisy on saying they don't want the government to be involved in the energy sector. They don't want the government picking winners and losers, when by their very actions, they absolutely do. They want government to continue to pick petroleum over renewable fuels, and we're going to fight back, and Iowa's in a unique position to do that because of our First in the Nation caucus. So you've already heard it today. Take action. Talk to your state legislators. Talk to the federal. Our federal delegation is united. They support renewable fuels. But folks, we got to encourage them. They get hit by a lot of people. There's a lot of things going on out there. Every time you see them, if it's in the coffee shop, if it's in church, if it's in a hill visit to D.C., talk to them about renewable fuels and to fight that fight. Find ways to urge the White House to stand by that campaign promise so it doesn't end up in the bottom of that trailer that we saw in the earlier picture. Now, speaking of campaign promises, you've also heard about America's Renewable Future. They're out with the IRFA booth. It's a new group. It's a grassroots effort that's going to hold presidential candidates accountable for their positions on the renewable fuel standard. It's not going to nominate. It's not going to endorse a specific candidate. But we're close enough to Christmas that I'll use this way of thinking about it. It's absolutely going to create a naughty and nice list and tell voters who supports the renewable fuel standard, who supports cracking into the petroleum market so that consumers can have a choice. That's a free market, not one that's dictated to by large corporations. So take the pledge out there, sign up the Iowa RFS pledge. As a bonus, you might win a $2,000 vacation or $500 in gas or biodiesel or a couple of NASCAR tickets. So, you know, it's a nice bonus. We appreciate that. But we know that you're really here to fight for the RFS. So that's going to be a group that you hear a lot about over the next year. Please sign up, get your friends to sign up, and take action. Because if you don't take action, you know who's left in charge of our decisions? If you don't take, that's the pledge stuff. If you don't take action, you know who's left in charge of our decisions? People who don't know which end of the cow to put the distillers in. Is that who you want left? Taking, you know, if we sit here and don't do anything, that's who's going to control it. And I'm running out of time, so I'll end on this. You can't see these numbers. But here's why it's really important. Here's why it's really important. These numbers down here that are mostly red are 25 years of where the price of corn from 1981 to 2005, where in all but 3 years, these are national average numbers. I know all of you here marketed better, you're Iowa farmers, so you did better than this. I know that, but these are national average numbers from USDA. For 22 out of 25 years, the price of corn a typical farmer in the United States got was less than what it cost them to produce it. The only reason that was a sustainable system is we had multi-billion-dollar farm bills, not something Congress or, quite frankly, farmers want to go back to. Then we passed the RFS, this nice little green area here. And we had what, according to any research I've been able to find, was probably the best if you take them consecutively, the best 8 years we've ever had in American agriculture. We've had some pretty good times before, but usually there's a couple of blips in that 10-year period. 8 straight years of profitability growing corn. And after dealing with 25 years of this, no one needs to apologize for that. I'm a firm believer that farmers don't need to be the only group in America that has to apologize when they make money. Everybody else goes to work and expects to make money. But I'll tell you what's scary. So we came up. RFS got yanked out in 2014. We hit the blend wall. The Obama administration blinked. They bought the big oil lies, and they pushed pause in 2014. So far, what's the first quarter? These are marketing years. So the 2014 crop came out. First quarter, we're back in the red. First time in 8 years. I don't know what it'll be by the end of the marketing year later this year, but for the first time, we could see farmers once again getting less money for their bushel of corn than it cost. And that's not acceptable. That's why we've got to stand up. That's why we've got to go take the RFS pledge. That's why we've got to be involved with groups like you saw up here, the Iowa Farm Bureau, the Iowa Corn Growers, the Iowa Soybean Association, heaven forbid even the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, because we're going to fight so that we can get back to where farmers can farm for the markets and not for a farm bill, and where consumers have choices at the pump, not dictates from oil companies that want to limit those choices and control and make money off of that monopoly. So folks, that's what we're doing here. I appreciate you being here. We're going to continue to fight that fight, and we actually have 2 great speakers coming up right after me that are going to tell you how they're doing it and how they would like to see it happen, how they're doing it in their state, and how they'd like to see the country do it. So with that, I appreciate you being here, and please hang around because we've got 2 of our keynote speakers coming up right after this. Thank you very much.